And with that, I'm going to just do a little introduction of what HiSam is. So aloha and welcome to Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. This is an annual event dedicated to educating and mobilizing the residents of Hawaii to protect our islands from the threats posed by invasive species. This year's theme explores what's at risk. We often find ourselves immersed in learning about the next invasive species threat, which is very important, but this year we want to shift the focus onto the beloved native species, their ecosystem functions, and the cultural practices being threatened by invaders. And so awareness and compassion is critical for invasive species work, because without those things, it is impossible to get people to care, to observe, and to make the changes we need. So this morning, we will be hearing from two Kāhuli conservationists who will share their experiences in both learning and teaching about Kāhuli. We'll have an opportunity for discussion at the end of the presentation. So please remember to send over any questions you have via the Q&A or chat. And with that, I'm going to do a little introduction for our first speaker while she pulls up her slides or the video, which of you guys like to do. So our first speaker is Aimee Sato. She is a hula dancer with Japanese ancestry who grew up on Kauai and now calls Kahalu'u Oahu her home. She graduated with a BS in Natural Resources and Environmental Management, where she studied the Kāhuli, and an MS in Botany at UH Manoa. Aimee is currently the stewardship coordinator for the Hawaiʻi National Estuarine Research Reserve in Ko'olaupo'o. And today she will share with us about Kāhuli and her background in biocultural conservation and life ways. I also just want to mention that Aimee and I met through Halauhi'a, which I'm sure she'll be mentioning in her talk. It's the Ecological Kinship Professional Development Program led by Kumu Kekuhi, Kele'i Kanaka Oleo Haile Lani. And Aimee is just going to show you exactly what Auntie has been teaching us all about, turning our landscape, sky, and the ocean into our family, and how we can use the different Hawaii life ways to learn more about how to express aloha for the potential of our island homes in Hawaii and beyond. So with that, mahalo nui, Aimee, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Hello, Darcy. I'm going to have Kiane help us listen to Auntie Nona first to just set us in the tune that we want to talk story with. So if you guys want to close your eyes or drift off, look into the sky as we listen to Okay, I don't know if you folks can chat us, but I'm hoping that most people know this mele. So if there is a way for you folks to chat, please let us know if you've heard this mele before. This is one of the first mele or songs that we have a relationship with Kāhuli. And I'm gonna try to share screen here real quick as I move to my window. And you folks let me know if you can see that okay. Good, awesome. Okay, so I wanted you folks to ho'olo no ka leo ke Kāhuli first. So listen to the voice of the tree snails. And Auntie Nona Beamer actually set this older chant. The chant actually Kāhuli aku Kāhuli mai comes originally from the newspapers Kanu pepa ku'oko'a, and it was printed about 165 years ago. So it's a lot older of a chant than we think. You know, I personally also grew up with this mele. It was actually one of my first hulas that I learned from one of my kumu that I'll introduce very soon. And it might be a lot of other folks' first hula that they learned. Usually a hula noho where you're sitting down, but it's a really simple mele with a simple tune. You can hear it. And Auntie Nona put this to music so that this story of the Kāhuli can keep going. And if you look up that video when you have time, she goes into a little bit of storytelling, and it's from her own mouth. So it's really beautiful to hear Auntie Nona talk about these Kāhuli snails. So I wanted to start off with that just to set the stage. Again, my name is Aimee Sato. I'm currently working as the stewardship coordinator at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology in He'eia, out in Windward, Oahu. And I also wanted to start by introducing myself in the way that I honor my kumu and my mokuahau in genealogy. I always like to let everybody know that my bloodline is strong in samurai ancestry from Iapana, Japan. My mother and my father met in Hawaii and I was born and raised in Hawaii. But I like to say that I like to be transparent that I am not Kanaka Maoli. So my function as I was born and raised here and was taught by these wonderful kumu. I have Auntie Nina and Uncle Charles, Auntie Kapuki Maka from Kauai, and Auntie Kekuhi, like Darcy was saying, from Hawaii Island. They really took me in and taught me everything, and I I feel that my function, as a non-Hawaiian, but also have been passed down this ʻike Hawaii, that it's my function to share what I'm allowed to share and have gotten permission to share so that maybe all the ʻike can make their way to the right person, right? So today I share a lot of what I've learned, but please go back to the source. And I also like to share my kumu that have brought me here through academia as well. So on the right, I have Dr. Mehana Vaughn from Kauai. She was also a hula dancer from Kauai, and then Dr. Melissa Price, who is the snail lady expert that we connected with in NREM as well. And my journey in Kāhuli really started with these two. I just happened to be sitting next to Mehana when we were listening to Melissa Price's talk on snails, and she was talking about DNA sequencing and things, and it was kind of, you know, not my expertise, right? I had no knowledge of snails other than Kahuli Aku Kahuli Mai dancing that, and then me and Mehana kind of whispered to one another, and we were saying, "Did you learn Kahuli Aku Kahuli Mai too?" And I was like, yeah, that was like one of the first hulas that I learned. Um, and then we started kind of talking story about what else might be out there as far as chants, songs, stories. Um, what can we get and learn and relearn from ʻike Hawaii to help with some of the efforts that Melissa Price and some of these other friends that are pictured here, like Snail Extinction Prevention Program, Oahu Army Natural Resources Program, Bishop Museum also does a lot of work with the snails, and there's kind of a really tight network of snail people, we like to say, that has so much love for the snails. But at the time that we had started Talking Story, as I was only an undergrad in NREM, we didn't know too much. There was definitely archival written research, and there was kumuhula that had stories about Kāhuli, but we hadn't put it together in a way that is accessible for conservationists and people that are trying to conserve these snails. So a lot of the times, the only thing we could cite was that Kāhuli were the singing snails of the forest. And that was kind of it. And then, you saw these citations over and over again. So that was my journey in NREM from um, going into my research, and then I'll share a little bit more about that. And I also want to honor my master's kumu in botany at UH Manoa with Dr. Tamara Tickton, who's also helped me think about interdisciplinary ways to bring science and culture and spiritual aspects together. So I honor these people. And just to give a little background, I'm not sure how much you folks know about these snails. And I am not the greatest expert on natural history, but this is kind of a quick background on Kāhuli, or pupukanioi, or land snails, as we call them. Back in the day, we had about 750 species. There are stories about like nu'uanu, where you can't even imagine snails today, where they would shake the trees and then hold a bag underneath and just collect hundreds of snails. And museums took them. There was so much abundance of snails that we can't even imagine today. It's estimated that there's about a 90% diversity loss, and these numbers change up and down as we discover more species. And we have species loss, unfortunately, as well. And these are all endemic, the 750 species, which is amazing. I mean, growing up, I didn't learn about these snails. We learned about Charles Darwin and all these other like awesome stories about adapted radiation. At least when I was growing up, we didn't learn about how amazing this diversity of tree snails was, tree and ground snails. So I mentioned here from Malka to Makai, we found them to the highest mountains to all the way to the coast. We hear these stories and songs and records, fossil records that they dwelled both in the ground dwelling snails, but also the tree snails like pictured here. And then there was a sharp decline. I think a lot of us are familiar with this. Some of these threats, Polynesian rat, Polynesian pig, we've had habitat loss, of course. Then we had European rat, European boar, and larger habitat loss when the Westerners arrived in 1778. And today, some of the largest challenges are with some of the predatory snails, like the rosy wolf snail that was brought in to control the African snail. And then also Jackson chameleons. You find snails inside these Jackson chameleons, which is super sad. And then, of course, with climate change, everything's really ramping up, right? The climate that the snails love to be in, which are mentioned in moʻolelo and stories about these like colder, wet spaces, especially the tree snails love this. And just like the manu and the birds, that elevation keeps getting higher and higher, right, as we get warmed. So I wanted to just briefly go over this. And then going into the research that I did a little bit of what I've shared earlier. So understanding what is the cultural significance, what else is out there. And I did this by looking at archival research through newspapers, looking at mele, any printed kind of songs, chants, and stories. I also interviewed, and I'll share some of those kumu in the next slide of who I interviewed. But what is the cultural significance other than this kind of maybe significant theme that we've known that they are the voice of the forest and they're the magical singing snails, right? I also wanted to enhance the ecological knowledge that we have as conservationists. A lot of mele and stories are actually these wealth of data that has associations in ecology, right? So if we're talking about the snails being on this plant, or they mention birds singing in the area, we know that these things were occurring in the same spaces, right? So seeing the archival and ʻike Hawaiʻi as a resource of data, right? Not just about learning about culture, but how can it help conservation directly? And that was my number 3, integrating indigenous knowledge into conservation of Kāhuli. So I worked really directly with the Snail Extinction Program and Bishop Museum to make sure that whatever I'm finding out is really useful for them and useful for the conservation of species. So these were some of my, the wonderful kumu that spent their time with me as I interviewed them. So I had Uncle Nathan Kalama, who I grew up with on Kauai. He's no longer with us, but he shared so many stories about growing up and hearing about the Kahuli. And then Auntie Kekuhi, Kili Ikanaka like I mentioned, I'm a lifelong learner from her, and she shared some stories about her ohana, the Kanaka family's relationship to these snails. Sam Ohugan on Oahu, not just a cultural holder, but also a long-time conservationist that's spent a lot of time in the mountains. So he was able to kind of pair these two sides, right? Uncle Puakea Nogameyer on the bottom left here. He was the main person that helped actually digitize all those newspapers that I was searching through. So it was really important for me to speak to him, and he had some wonderful ʻike to share as well. Kumu Kamealoha Forest from Kauai, beautiful person that haku meles and is deep in the mele world. Similar to Uncle Kimo Keolana Alama on Oahu. Um, he's a mele expert, so he shared some stories with me. And then Maile Beamer on the very far right with Auntie Nona Beamer, her Hanai mother, and shared some stories directly about her experience hearing Auntie Nona speak as well. And one of the things that is continuously building is the significance of Kāhuli. Like I said, there are 750 species, right? We know when something is significant in Hawaii culture and life ways when they put a name to it, right? And then the names are so significant. You can get so much from the naming system in Hawaiian worldview. So I could talk for days on this, but I just wanted to put at least some of this is just some of the names that we found and some of the significant ones. You'll notice Kāhuli is the most familiar one that everybody uses. We have a bunch that start with pupu that tells you that it's a shell. And this is across Mauka to Makai, right? We have ocean shells that start with pupu as well. And freshwater snails as well. There's some interesting ones like polole, hini hini, which I'll go into a little bit more, which means like a soft sound. Naka, which means to quiver. We have some newer ones that we found out too, like mayau, mapu, and mehau. But yeah, there's so much out there. I just wanted to let everybody know that this is significant and there's a lot that we can dive into and find out ecological information as well, just from the names itself. And with this, coming from the most common name Kāhuli, I wanted to bring out some overall themes that I found out through my years of research. Kāhuli can mean to turn, similar to this idea of hulihia, this turnover or change or shift. Or changing shape. So we see this in a lot of moʻolelo and stories about these kahuli. They're often shapeshifters. Another word for this is kupua, just like Kamapua'a, if you're familiar with Kamapua'a, the demigod. These snail characters in stories are often able to change shape. Sometimes human-like, sometimes snail-like. And there's also many stories where the kahuli is referenced or in mele or through the name itself when someone is shapeshifting. So there's one story of Hiaka shapeshifting into a pohaku, and she references the kahuli and the pupukanioi. And I'll go into one more idea of this huli here in a second with one of the Pele and Hiaka stories. They were often hoailona or omens. And often refer to royalty, especially when royal bloodlines were born. You would see rainbows and then you would hear the kahuli singing. There are also hoailona for turnover or changes, like I mentioned right above. There are also environmental indicators, which is really true today as well. When you find the kahuli, it means that all is well. The environment is probably pretty good still. We got enough rain, and hopefully there's native species that the kahuli can live on, right? This overarching theme of the voice of the forest and the singing snails is prevalent in Hawaii and also across Oceania if we look into this. And related to the voice, this importance to hula and hula practitioners. So a lot of the folks that I interviewed talked about or had themselves kakao or traditional tattoos of Kāhuli. This is similar to how if you had a Kāhuli, a lei Kāhuli, or a lei of the Kāhuli shells, it would help you inhabit and get that power of that beautiful voice. So the snails, also the manu and the birds in the forest were some of our first teachers of chant. And going back into that idea of hulihia, Pelen Hiaka, if you're familiar with that story, it's about the Pele, our fire goddess, and her youngest sister Hiaka, which represents restorative actions and restoration in our forests. Long story short, Pele dreams of a lover on Kauai and asks Hiaka to go fetch him. And Hiaka goes through this long journey. One of the first battles that she has is with Panaeva on Hawaii Island. And this is a really interesting one where a mele kaʻikaua, if you're familiar with some of the chants that start with the Lia Kamona Velagiahi, those are mele kaʻikauas, and you can kind of feel that energy, right? When you hear the chanting, it's really intense. It kind of sounds like a war chant, and that's exactly what it is. When Hiaka needed help, this army and Pele's army was called on. So her family members came, and at the very front of the army were these sound makers, which we're calling pu, and it was Maiau, Hinihini, and Mapu, which was all land snails, which is really interesting that these tiny little guys were the ones at the very front of the army, signifying their arrival. So lots to think about there. I'm going to move on in light of time. Laukaʻieʻie is another super rich story, very similar to Pelehiaka, interesting. This is one that we've only really scratched the surface on, I believe. It's not as translated as Pele and Hiaka, so I'm introducing this in hopes that more people talk about this, and then maybe one day somebody can dive deeper into it. Because yeah, I've only scratched the surface on this. Laukaʻieʻie is largely untranslated, and it was found and written in two newspapers, Kaleo Kalahui and Kanumpa Ka Oyayo, and it was started in 1894, written by Mose Manu. And if you look into it, there's about 50 plus chapters, and they were publishing almost every single day these new chapters of this chant, this moʻolelo and story. So it's very, very long, similar to Pele and Hiaka. Again, long story short, it's actually really similar. Laukaʻieʻie dreams of this man on Kauai. There's always these men on Kauai. And she's in Waipio on Hawaii Island near Hiʻilave. And she asks all of her friends and families who can go and fetch her lover. And then the smallest one, Pupukanioe, a land snail, volunteers for this. And in this story, they talk about Pupukanioe kind of being this kupua image that I mentioned earlier. And then the man in question is Kavelo. We're gonna call him for short. And it's this epic journey, very similar to Pele and Hiaka, but the main character is Pupukanioe, a snail. And they meet different snails along the way. And there's these kind of recurring themes that I've noticed just from not even translating the whole thing. And so I pulled out one portion on the right, which is really interesting and kind of goes into my most recent hypothesis of why the singing land snails. So it could be laukapalai or laukapali. Sometimes there's different forms of names in newspaper, and it could just be a typo. So I'm just putting both of them there. We're leaning more towards Laukapali is the correct one because it's more often spelled like that. But in this part of the story, they talk about Laukapali being a friend of Laukaʻieʻie, and she's trying to entertain the chiefess Laukaʻieʻie. And then in this one part, it talks about her grabbing a la'i or a tea leaf and creating a tea leaf whistle with it, a pula'i. And then the chiefess Laukaʻieʻie is entertained, and therefore she grabs the pupukani oi, and the shells sing. So this made me start thinking about the potential hypothesis, in addition to all the other thoughts of why these snails sing, right? That perhaps it was a whistle. And this is one that we're looking into more. There's also themes in the story of Kihapu, which is the Great War Conch. Towards the end of the story, when Laukaʻieʻie and Kawelo finally get married, at the precipice of Waipio, they place all the snail shells with Kihapu in the conch shell, and they talk about them singing to celebrate the marriage. So diving more into this, recently we did a snail singing party at the Bishop Museum with a lot of the snail conservationists. So this whistling theme continues. We look at some of our Aotearoa and Maori folks that talk about the same singing land snails. And we were able to find out some really cool things, like the pictured on the bottom right about it helps to make a more sharp whistle when you wet them, which ties back into some of the chants in mele that talk about rain and how it gets louder with rain. And then hini hini, the succineas had more of a faint voice and faint whistle, which ties into that translation of hini hini. So lots more to discover. And I wanted to end with just recognizing some of the resources as we move on to Kiane, which she'll talk a little bit more about the next generation. And I think Daniel is in the webinar today, but Daniel Kellen helped to create this website for students and educators, because we need to keep telling these stories, and not just about conservation and research, but also about the cultural significance. So I end my talk with my favorite quote: "Their value must be understood beyond the ranks of a few scientific specialists, and story is the way we encode such values in our culture." So I hope that you can take one of these stories that I shared today and share it with somebody. But yes, mahalo nui. Thank you for your time.
Yes, mahalo, Aimee. That was wonderful. I think a great start to grounding us in moʻolelo and ka'au to get us set for our next presenter, which I will be just kind of flowing into right now, do a little introduction. And Kiane, if you want to pull up your slides. At the end of this, as a reminder, we'll have a little discussion. So feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A or anything if you have any. Okay, so Kumu Kiane Prietto is a kumu at Kanu, which is a public charter school in Aimee. She teaches the Kāhuli class, which is a blended hybrid program available on 5 Hawaiian islands, with its piko or center on Hawaiʻi Island. Originally from Old Homestead in Waimanalo, Oahu, she now resides in Pu'ukapu, Waimea on Hawaiʻi Island. She holds a master's degree in education and is dual certified in social studies and special education. Kiane is currently developing ʻāina-based programming for learners of all ages to highlight the interconnectedness of Native Hawaiian biodiversity. And I just want to make a quick mention that Kiane Prietto is also this year's HiSam MVP for Hawaiʻi Island, which is awesome, for her outstanding dedication to invasive species education and community outreach. As a kumu at Kanu, she integrates invasive species topics into her curriculum and empowers her haumana with hands-on experiences in conservation and biodiversity monitoring. through her participation in Boweret's Reaches, which is a summer program under Dr. Noreen Young. Kiane gained expertise in native and invasive snail research. She brought that ʻike back to her classroom by guiding student-led biodiversity surveys and fostering a deeper pilina with her students and the ʻāina. Her leadership extends beyond the classroom. After discovering little fire ants in her neighborhood, she initiated a social media campaign to raise awareness and mobilize her community to take action. Kiane exemplifies innovation, kuleana, and a deep commitment to protecting Hawaii's native ecosystems. And for that, we mahalo you. So I will pass it over to you.
Mahalo. I appreciate you guys so much. So my name is Kiane Prietto, and I'm a kumu kanu kaina aloha. And my favorite snail is Succinea conaensis, and I'll talk more about why, but it's on Mauna Kea, and we actually recently rediscovered it with my haumana and accidentally Keao High School. So mahalo to them, and mahalo to Mauna Kea Forestry Recovery Project, cast them, and all the wonderful people doing conservation. What's unique about my program is that I work in secondary with my students, so middle school to high school, and I am partnered with elementary school teachers too. So we work together and a unit to create curriculum that's layered. So we provide like ohana-centered learning. And if you don't know, Hawaii Island's huge. You can actually fit all the islands in Hawaii Island. And West Hawaii Island is also has three mauna that they call home. So we have Hualalai that's more focused towards Kona, Hui. Mauna Kea is like Waikoloa, Kona, some Waimea, Ohana. But Hui Kohala is unique because we have anyone from Kohala, like Niuli'i area, Kawaihae, Waimea, all the way to Honoka'a. So that's all the families that call Kohala their mauna, they're in our hui. So we have over 200 kids in my specific hui, and I teach middle school and sometimes high school students, and then their younger siblings as well. It's just a diverse group of learning, and we love it because everybody gets to learn. So the parents learn alongside their students. And when they're at home, they work together to create and provide extra curriculum. So they provide like supportive curriculum to the students. And then we go out into the field or into Aina together to collect data. We learn about that space. One unique program that we always start at the beginning of the year, if you don't know, Kamehameha, his home is Hawaii Island. And so we felt at the beginning of the year we should learn about Kamehameha. So the younger students learned about Paea in his younger years, and as he transitioned into Kamehameha and took over the Hawaiian Islands, we ended it with learning about where he built his heiau. So if you haven't been to it yet, it's Pu'ukohola Heiau. It's in Kawaihae Harbor. And it was a very moving experience because some of our families, they're descendants of Kamehameha or they're descendants of the people that helped build that heiau. And they're still descendants of people that their aunties or uncles participate in makahiki, and they help do the there's a heiau out there too that they participate and still hold to this day. And we would have never known that had we not had gone into those spaces and had that relationship with that space. And so we mahalo that area. And then, of course, it provides students with learning opportunities because if you don't know, you probably know, but you could tell your kid or like your students or your family friends like the same thing over and over again, but it will not stick until you take them into that space and they actually do those things. So I talked all year about snails, and until they saw a snail, like a real one, they were like, "Oh, look, a snail!" And I was like, "Okay, thank you." I had printouts for like the entire month. So it was amazing. But our school-wide theme this year is Nana Aina, which is to observe the land from the highest peaks of the mountain down to the deepest depths of the sea. So we really want to ask ourselves, like looking at these spaces, what needs to be done? How can we restore them? And then what can we do as individuals every day to make a difference? And I ended up deciding, hey, let's do surveys. So that's what we did, all of us. It didn't matter how old you were. There's a preschooler right here, and there's a high schooler right here, and we have a middle schooler or a soon-to-be middle schooler coming in. And we all worked together in these different areas. So we went from Malka to Makai and we observed the land. And normally people go into these spaces and they look at plants and they look at birds, but we looked at the tiny stuff. So we were looking for fire ants, we were looking for snails, we were looking for everything and anything that people often overlook. So it was a very eye-opening experience, and it was helpful because a lot of these spaces that we visited are right next to our family's houses, and they've actually never gone there because they're like, oh, it's the same experience as our home. Why would we go there? And yeah, it was a great experience because they ended up learning a lot more about, how to restore their land. Um, this one place in the middle specifically is Koholalele, and they have restored, it used to be an old plantation, sugar cane field, and now they provide food for their entire community. And you would never know because it just looks like eucalyptus trees the whole way down. And so that was great because one of our students ended up volunteering and is now doing the summer program with them. So because of these opportunities of being in spaces and learning about different community partners and how to make our, generational wealth has been an eye-opening experience for all of us. This is a map of the habitat quality for Hawaii Island, and this is pre all the fires that we've been having. So it's a little outdated. It's from like 2019. You'll notice that the areas that are in red, they're the community, right, well developed. Medium areas is more like pasture lands. And then the green is a high density native forests. And so the sites that we went to, these are the most recent ones in dark green. We went to Koholalele, Hawaii Wildlife Center, which are mainly in this area, these upper divisions. And at first glance, you're thinking, oh, this must be amazing because it used to be pasture or plantation, and now they have all these native plants that they've been restoring. But as we did our surveys, none of the kids could find anything that were snails or even tiny insects. They were all dead. Unfortunately, the years and years of using pesticides on the plantation has just demolished everything in the microbiome. So like nothing exists. We didn't even find ants, which was normally find ants at least, but no, we didn't find anything. And it was really unfortunate. But as we progressed throughout the whole school year, we found snails on Mauna Kea. So at the very top of Mauna Kea, there's Saxina conaensis, and they're just thriving in rocks. They're not living in anything besides rocks. So the kids were really turned around because they're like, well, what do we do? Like, what do they eat? And you're like, the microbiome. And they're like, but there's no plants. Yeah, surprise. They just need a healthy, clean environment in order to thrive. And they found them in all different species, and there was like hundreds of shells everywhere too. So that was very interesting to see. That means that they haven't been disturbed because nobody's been like poaching the shells or anything. And then our up and coming sites for the following school year are actually based on our bio blitz that we recently conducted, and just hearing stories from different family members and people that participated in our snail fest. So what was great is that throughout the school year, we've learned that once a place has been destroyed, like it used to be pasture or plantation, your chances of finding anything on the micro scale is like almost zero, unfortunately, because birds and, even bigger insects, they're able to fly away from habitats that have been destroyed, but the microorganisms are really the ones that get destroyed. And so we really want to emphasize this idea that if you have a special space, to keep protecting it. And if anything, work from that space down to the sea. So that's something that they're working on. Pu'oumi is that they're saving Pu'oumi, and they're fencing it in, and they're trying to do outplanting, and they're trying to connect the upper forest to the lower forest to help bring down that water to the sea. So, and that all that healthy nutrients and the snails and stuff like that. And it's never too late also to just plant native. What's interesting is that my house is actually used to be pasture, and we planted native plants, and now we have micro snails. Don't know where they came from, just plant native, and maybe you'll find some. And what's interesting is that for my project this year, it's very much Kumu led at the beginning of the year. So as a Kumu, I want to just expose the parents and the kids to an entire Ohana experience. So taking them out into spaces, having them touch native plants, see native plants, and understand what it means to really have and be in space and why we should protect them opening them up to like art exhibitions, having them participate in art exhibitions. They've never done art before. I had to teach them between like cool and hot colors, and Kāhuli Fest, of course, was amazing. Opening them up to like how to collect data, how to do book writing, a hero's journey, just really leading them and showing them what are the possibilities that you can do and learn together. And then as the school year progresses, we really want them to focus on learning and doing things independently. So instead of me hosting the lay workshops, they're going to lead the lay workshops and explain to our community why we use invasive plants instead of native plants for our lay workshops. And then talking about hosting their own BioBlitz in the coming years. And then, of course, they want to just have the ability to have conversations with other people in the community and their family members. And I will never forget, I had a student call me at like 7 o'clock at night. And he was like, I just want you to know that I shared with my entire family the story on the snail extinction prevention program. And everybody that left my house was talking about snails. And I was like, thank you. Don't call me after 7. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it was great. And so we just want to mahalo everybody. And we have our May Day performance every year. So as Aimee was sharing about Kāhuli Mai, the younger kids actually perform that for everybody and teaches other people in the community how to do it. We have lei making. You can visit Hoaka. He comes and he does his talk on coconut rhinoceros beetles. We have a little decon kit, so if you want to decon, you're more than welcome to join us. And you'll see that over here, the kids actually made their own projects to display. So this one made a Kāhuli hat. This one is a snail, but he's covered in poop, like the Laminella sanguinea. And then we have pilina and we have native plants. So we give away a lot of native plants. We talk about snails. They showcase their project, and we teach everybody how to make lei. So you'll see she has one shoe on because she uses her foot to hold the lei so she can make her lei. And that is why she is the star of the show. So it's great because everything that we learned throughout the school year is demoed at the end. And this Bio Blitz that we recently had allowed us to just not only thank our community partners and showcase community outreach, but it allowed everybody in our community to kind of work together to gather information, share stories, learn more about native Hawaiian biodiversity. I had a lot of people actually download. We have like a invasive species snail survey that we were able to share out, and how to ID snails and things like that. So it's great. And we actually collected enough data to determine where our future sites will be for the coming school year and future partners as well. So mahalo for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Mahalo.
Sweet. Mahalo nui, Kiane. That was wonderful. All right. I do have a good handful of questions here. Let's see. I will ask this one. This is for Kiane. Are there any threats we unknowingly pose to Kāhuli that may come into our home property spaces? Are there any precautionary measures that can be taken to prevent accidents done to Kāhuli inadvertently?
Yes. So one thing I know is planting invasive species because it does house other invasive species. So if you plant native, that's great. One thing that I learned too, that I guess a lot of people didn't realize with the BioBlitz is that when you're treating for slugs, you're treating for snails. So you're gonna kill everything. Yeah, that's one thing that they don't realize. Snails and slugs are like the same thing. And so if you're treating for them, that's, not very, you're killing everything. We like to do a slug boil. So we throw all of we go out at night, and you can make your kids do this, or like your neighbor's kids if you don't have kids. And you just go out and you collect all the snails that you can using chopsticks, and you throw them in like a bottle. That can get like, we use like the same pot, it's so gross, or a 5-gallon bucket, and then with a lid. And then you just pour boiling hot water inside, and that will kill the rat lungworm too, and it'll kill them really quickly. And then you just pour them out into like a pit, and then you bury it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Kiane. That's a great tip. We always like to share the slug jugging method, especially with rat lungworm and everything else too. Like, it's a good tool to have. Let's see. So Marsha Ho wanted to know what was the name of Kiane's favorite snail again, as well as Aimee's. Yeah, I don't know if you want to share your favorite snail and why.
Yes, mine's is Sextonea conensis already. Conensis. And it's endemic to Hawaii Island and is I think found in Kona as well, but we only found it on Mauna Kea.
And mine, yeah, I forgot to say in the beginning, but mine is Laminella sanguinea. But like many people, it's really hard. It's like, what's your favorite plant? I can't choose one. But Laminella is the red one right next to Kiana's head with the zigzag pattern. It almost looks like a zigzag design. But it was one of the first snails that I met in the field. With snail extinction prevention program. And at first, all I saw was like it kind of looked like a piece of bird poop on a leaf because it puts a lot of like dirt and stuff onto their shells. So you actually can't see that beautiful pattern. And I kind of love that they just like hide this beautiful pattern, and underneath it is actually one of the nicest designs.
No,
Can you
that is
share the
really neat. Okay, I have one for you, Aimee. So I know you were looking mostly at land snails. I was just wondering, did you see any like similar symbolism with like the marine snails with the land snails? Or like did that ever come up in any of your studies? Yeah.
No, that's a great question. I'm hoping someone can dive deeper into it. Yeah, I didn't have too much time to talk about how I got to thinking about the snails as whistles. But it was through doing more Hawaii practice daily, right? Like we were blowing conch shells, and then I learned from Auntie Kikuhi even with the hihibai and the stream shell. Is that a limpet or something? I forget what.
Something like that.
The hihibai. It looks like an opihi, but it's in our streams. And I learned with her that you can make a whistle with it. And I'm actually somebody that can't whistle normally.
Me too.
And I was able to figure it out with the hihibai. So that was really significant for me. I was like, oh, I just needed a vehicle, which is in Hawaii worldview, and this is just from talking to a lot of my kumu, is, it's all about association and relationships, right? So when most indigenous people and Polynesians and Hawaii people included, when they see a shell, they naturally hear the voice. Like if you go around the world, a lot of people have trumpets or conch shells. So if you told them that what is the voice of that shell, most people will be able to associate it because they can hear it in their head, right? Then most people have heard a conch shell. But for some reason, when we would say, oh, the snails sing, we would get really literal and people would say, well, they don't have vocal cords or, they can't do these.
Mhm.
But it's such a simple thinking. It's quite simple. It's like when you see a shell that looks like a shell, whether it's from the ocean or the stream or from the tree, we're going to associate it with our relationship, our human relationship with these snails. And often they are instruments or lei, right? So I think there's a lot more we could dive into, like in the story of Laukaʻieʻie, um, the poo is associated with them in some parts of the story, kihapu, and then they're singing together. So I think there's more there, even with the freshwater snails. And then we can also look to um, some of our cousins, like our Maori cousins, and their relationship. They also have conch and land snails that sing, and most of them are used as instruments as well. So yeah, it would be really curious to look at that dualism.
Yeah, the overlap. I love it. All right, I have one from Kauai Ferry. I heard the opening theme in a mele by Puanani Ha'aheo Edgar. I want to say it was titled Kumulipo. With this, I have to presume the kahuli has significance in the Kumulipo.
Yes, that's a good one. I haven't had enough time to dive into the Kumulipo, but I assume that they come up in the va that introduces all the pili pili creatures, like the little clingy, sticky kind of insecty kind of there. Yeah, there's a stanza just for that. But I don't know, Kiane, or have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, so we actually just talked about this with Leilani. Oh my gosh, I forgot her last name. But she's sits on like the board for like immersion schools and stuff. But she was saying how Kahuli in the Kumulipo was referring to the turning of like the creation story. So like from darkness to light and stuff like that. But it wasn't specific to the snails. We're
Okay.
looking. So if you have a va that has the specific snails, if we find it, we'll let you know.
Yes, I do remember searching through it, but maybe it might just be that they're mentioned with a name that we're not familiar with, but there was definitely
Hmm.
not Kahuli or Pupukanioya or anything that came up. I believe the conch is mentioned though, the pool. But yeah, curious, very curious.
Yeah, another thing to dive into.
Yeah.
Kiane, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience with Dr. Noreen Young at Bishop Museum and what you guys do over the summer through the BioRex program.
Yeah, of course. So she's great, and so is Ken, because they give you hands-on experience on building curriculum with a curriculum specialist. So if you're a teacher or you know a teacher, or you have, kids that are going to have teachers next year in the coming years, and they want to have more outdoorsy experiences, that's definitely where you want to start. So they have cultural practitioners that help us build curriculum. So they're ʻāina-based and they're specific to our area. We work with another group of teachers that are just hands down the best. We always build everything out together through the summer for the coming school years. And then we get hands-on. So we're dropped in the field. We work with the other interns, like we're hiking. You're cleaning snow boxes at Bishop Museum. If you want to volunteer at Bishop Museum, please email me because we need help cleaning snow boxes. We get to see everything in the archives, and it's not just snails, it's plants. You're learning about the birds and everything that's connected in Native Hawaiian biodiversity, and you get to be outside a lot. And then I think our favorite was my coworker is not a hiker, and so we had to hike Kaala Mountain, and Noreen didn't tell us that it was a cliff. Because we're from like Mauna Kea is like flat, okay? Let me tell you. Yeah, it's very steady. And she was like, "No, it's totally fine. Like you're gonna be great." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And so we get there and it's just nothing but uluhe on the side of us. And that's how we learned about uluhe. But it was a great experience because you get to see like the snail enclosures and you get to learn how to use a laboratory, and they connect you with other labs that can actually travel and like come to your school. And so they do DNA sequencing, plant preferences, and just everything that has to do with Native Hawaiian biodiversity. It's not just snails. And so if you're interested, please let us know. We have only 8 teachers this year, and last year we had 3. So we're growing, and I think next year is our last year.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, hello, New, for sharing that. What a cool program. Okay, I had a community question. People who are wondering, like, how did the kahuli get here? Was it on birds' muddy feet as an egg? I don't know. Do you guys know that? How did they get to Hawaii?
That's probably the best good hypothesis that it was
Okay.
on a bird or something or a plant, right? They're
Right.
they're pretty good at sticking.
Yeah.
So bird, plant, I've heard poop. Like I've heard that
Mm.
they pooped out. And then I've also heard that, well, this is from Ken, so I know it's pretty accurate. that on Hawaii Island, on our side of the island, on the west side, we've actually had a different round of snails arrive later than all the other snails in Hawaii. And it was only like on the west side of Hawaii, and that's why they're like succineas, so they're like sticky. And yeah, and so they all kind of arrive different timings, and it's really interesting because we actually fed snails to birds, like in our we have like a DLNR, we raise the birds, and then we found like eggs in the poop of the birds, and they were still alive.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that is incredible. Good.
Non-native snails, but yeah,
Yeah,
snails.
yeah, still counts. Wow, it's possible. I really never thought about that. Okay, good to know. I will let them know. And I guess I know that it's been hard for you to find, you and your students to find Kiane, but is there any tips or recommendations for seeing a Kāhuli in real life, or any plants they like to hang on best, or like what trails you've taken that you might have seen one? Yeah, people always ask, where can I see one in real life?
I guess Amy, you want to speak for Oahu first, because I don't really know Oahu.
Oahu's a little, I think, harder to find them. Um, yeah, you have to really connect with the snail extinction prevention program. There's um, I think we're trying to change the name from snail jail to something else. I forget. Kipukas?
Yeah,
Um,
I love that.
yeah. We used to call them snail jails because that's where the snails there's two. I believe they're working on one more. Kipuka Kāhuli. That's a good one. But yeah, I mean, it's really rare. You can see some of the like the very smaller, I don't even know which ones they are, Kiane, super small, more common um, native snails. Um, if you go hike up in the ko'olaus, and then sometimes they'll just be like clinging to you when you're hiking, but it's gonna be hard to find like the ones behind Kiane over there. And then when we do, um, I mean, you go to Bishop Museum to see the archives, but to see them alive, yeah, Oahu is unfortunately really hard.
Yeah, I would say that Ka'ala for sure. They're also wanting to build a gondola on Ka'ala, so you guys can send in your testimonies for that, because the snail mollusk mansions are up on Ka'ala, but you can also find them all over Ka'ala. Like they're not just in the mollusk mansions; they're just out and about. Like the one behind you, Aimee, is actually just on Ka'ala, like on the trail. Um, it has a little va'a. So it's great. And then of course for Hawaii Island, we have more focus on like the micro snails. So I have I actually have like an infographic I can send out to everybody if you guys are interested. You just have to email me because we have to do like a QR code to keep track of everybody who's used it. But yeah, so we have micro snails that are pretty common everywhere, but they like plants like carnival, which have like the specific leaf shape. We've also found them on hydrangea. So hydrangea, it's very common for like pa'u riders. So a lot of people in Waimea have hydrangea. And also on I found them on there's like a viney plant and I can't remember what it is, but they're almost all over Carnival. So if you plant Carnival, you'll most likely get some native snails on there at some point. And then of course they do like mamaki. It's more of like a supplement for them, like the kale. They don't love it, but they'll eat it.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. Opuhe and olona are like really great plants to have because they love them. But unfortunately, so do rats and slugs and non-native snails. But if you plant them, like just malama them, that's all.
Awesome. Mahalo for that. Oh, Beth was wondering, is it Hoi Kuahivi, that plant you're talking about, the viney one?
Yes, yes.
Yes, right on. Great guess, Beth. Okay, and see, we're about at 10:30, a little over. I just had one last question. I don't know, I see all the beautiful designs and colors behind you, Kiane. I'm wondering, does anyone have theories as to like what drives like is it like what plant they like to live on that drives the design of the shell? Or I don't know if anyone has a hypothesis about that.
That was my guess. And like
Okay.
so like the ohia, right, it's like really bright red and all of our like birds here, right? Polila and the mamane, like maybe like a blending technique. But if you
Mm.
look at them, have you been to Bishop Museum, like the archives yet?
No, not to this. No.
There's a really cool picture I can like send in, you can send it out, but it's a map of Oahu and then the snails that are endemic to that area region, they all are based on
Yes.
colors. So west side's like brown and then pure white like the clouds, and then east side is like these colorful ones, and then I'm sure Amy's got like a whole ton of mana'o on that though.
Wonderful.